Let's do this. Turn right. Get ready to turn left. Turn left and then turn right.
Alright, good afternoon, folks. From Great Falls, Montana, this is John Tapp with Mack Anthem 770-inch sleeper. And as we begin with trim in Washington.
Turn right.
I hope everybody enjoys the whole day. So let's get this right on.
Keep right and then exit right. Exit right. Caution, please mind the speed limit. Caution, please mind the speed limit. Keep right and then exit right. Exit right. Get ready to turn right. Turn right and then turn right. Turn right. Turn right. Here we are, safe and sound. Time to hit the road. Recomputing.
Please join me again for more Classics for Kids.
And now back to Hello Houston. To comment on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now back to Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Houston's food scene has long been a source of local pride, a reflection of the city's diversity and creativity. But lately, that story has been complicated by a growing number of restaurant closures.
Get ready to
The River
turn
Oaks
left.
location of Perry's Steakhouse, a familiar name in Houston's dining,
Turn left.
is set to close after 7 years. The company says the decision stems from a contract dispute with its landlord. Still, the closure fits
Turn
into
left.
a broader pattern. Across Houston in 2025, restaurants have been grappling with rising food and labor costs, higher
Turn
rents,
left.
and changing consumer habits. For many, the financial pressure has become too much. To better understand what's happening and what he thinks is the future of dining in Houston, we are joined by Eric Sandler, food and culture editor at Culture Map. Eric, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Perry's is the latest in a series of closures, citing landlord issues. What dynamic is at play here that we might not be seeing?
Well, I think what we're seeing to a certain extent is there's a lot of development, particularly inside the Loop. You know, a lot of properties that didn't exist. I mean, if you think about, you know, Perry's is in the River Oaks Shopping Center, which is this iconic destination for shopping and dining. But if you think about what's around them, you know, when Perry's opened, Autry Park didn't exist, Regent Square didn't exist, Montrose Collective didn't exist. All of these are large-scale retail developments that have 2, 3, 4, 5 restaurants in them, and that affects the rental rates for the surrounding properties. So what seemed like a reasonable rent in 2018 or 2019, that number's going to go up considerably now with more density
Get ready
and
to
more
turn
traffic
left.
in these neighborhoods.
But then who's taking those leases? Because I think back to, is it Mykonos Islands, whatever, on Richmond, that was moved out because their rent went up. And this
Turn
was,
left.
I don't know, 15 years ago. The place still, it still sits empty. So who's coming to take that? And does it benefit the landlord to be doing this?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I think, you know, in a lot of instances, you know, it's the evil boogeyman, the out-of-town restaurant group. I mean, if you think about, well, but if you think about, you know, Montrose Collective is one example. You know, you have the Steakhouse, which is from a Baltimore group. You've got some locals in there. You know, Uchi is from Austin. But in Autry Park, for example, you know, most of that's local. Two from Berg Hospitality, Anam, a Vietnamese concept from the same owner as MF Sushi. You know, Maya Huel is part of the group that owns Liberty Kitchen and State Fair. So, you know, I think it's a little bit of a complicated narrative. I mean, there are restaurant groups that can, you know, justify these increased costs and kind of spread the, you know, some of the hard costs among multiple concepts, right? That, you know, if you're a little larger, you have a little better buying power, maybe you get a little better deal on your ingredients and your wine and things like that. So, I mean, that's what's happening. You know, the smaller guys are getting, it's hard to compete.
And that's what I was going to say, though. But would you say that, you know, when you're looking at these major restaurant groups that are able to say, you know, yeah, we can take on a really beautiful location, we don't mind paying the high rent, and it's kind of pushing out these smaller local chefs that are trying to live out their dream, how does that impact the local food scene in Houston? Because that's what we're kind of famous for.
No, and I think that forces some of these people to be a little more creative about the locations that they choose, and you have to kind of lean into being a destination. I mean, you know, we just got the James Beard Award semifinalist announcements today. You know, places like Basso, Camaraderie, Agnes and Sherman, these are all independently owned, chef-driven concepts. They're in the Heights, you know, which, you know, 10 years ago wasn't really a dining destination and now is one of the hot spots. Or last year's winner, Thomas Billy, Belly of the Beast. That's way up there in Spring. And if you're an interlooper, you know, it feels like you're driving to Dallas, but the people in Spring are really excited to have this award-winning restaurant in their neighborhood that they can patronize.
How's the staff shortage going?
You know, I think we're kind of have come through that to a certain extent. Obviously, the pandemic and the restaurant closures when they were closed for dine-in, that was a real shock for people. A lot of people left the industry. I feel like, a ton of my favorite bartenders became Amazon delivery drivers and H-E-B personal shoppers and all of that stuff. I have seen more and more people coming back to the industry. I think, part of that is that wages are up. So, that line cook that used to make, $11 an hour is now making $17 or $18 an hour, which is its own challenge for the people who own the restaurants, but at least they're getting something that resembles more like a fair wage.
Well, it seems like the 15% tip is gone.
Oh no, the 15 you will be sneered at for a 15% tip. And I say that with all, my late father was just 15% of the subtotal every single time. Nowadays if Dad was still around, I'd have to be floating a little cash on top of that just so that we stay in everybody's good graces. Yeah, 20% please. Yeah.
When we go back to the real estate issue and all of this and the rentals and all of that, I'm curious from a food journalist point of view, are you concerned when these higher rents become the norm, does it change the opportunity for creativity and birth within the industry?
Well, I think it changes what's available in individual neighborhoods, right? Like if you live near the Galleria or you live in River Oaks, you're going to get more homogenized, less individualistic restaurants. The one that hurt me last year was Ostia, which was in this prime location on Dunleavy, this really creative Italian restaurant, and they couldn't make it. And I was really sad about that, and that hurts, all of my friends in Montrose and River Oaks who don't have that available to them. So, they'll have to drive to the East End to go to Nemo. They'll have to head to the Heights to try Hicksville. They'll have to go to West Street to try Milton's. They'll have to diversify. If they want certain kinds of cuisine or a certain style of experience, they're going to have to drive a little farther to get that.
So have you heard of this scenario where a landlord says, okay, your rent's going to go from $30,000 a month to $40,000 a month, and so the restaurant closes, and then you can't get anybody in there for $40,000 a month, and the landlord has to go back to somebody and say, I'll settle for $32,000. Is that happening?
Right. I can't say for certain whether that's happening. I haven't personally heard about that happening, but yes, it does seem like at some point there's a ceiling, right? But these landlords are accountable to their lenders and their investors, and they have taxes to pay, and also it's not that they're greedy. I think that narrative is overstated and very popular on social media, but everybody's accountable to something.
Yeah.
But we saw restaurants from they had just opened to restaurants that had been around, like Rudy Lechner's closed down. We saw, you mentioned Ostia, BB Lemon. There was a couple of barbecue restaurants.
Holly's is the one that hurt me. 20-something years in Montrose. But
that's sad.
It is sad. It is sad, and I saw that the owner of Polly's, Paul Petronella, announced a new business that he's going to be doing with wellness coaching and some lifestyle stuff to help people live healthier. And so, I think there's a certain amount of push-pull, right? Like the landlord wanted a rent that Paul didn't think was reasonable, and he also had this other thing that he was interested in trying, and so, he walked away from a business that a lot of us really loved. I mean, I was a Polly's regular, and I miss it. I miss it dearly, but
I miss Good Dog.
I know, right? So I heard, and I believe it's probably true, that all of these weight loss drugs that are being used, people now go into restaurants and they split. Even if there's a split fee of $2 or $5, they're willing to pay that. And so the people that can afford these weight loss drugs are also the ones that can afford high-end restauranting. And so it's been a hit to high-end.
No, I think that's true, and I think people are eating less. One of the other effects of those drugs is that it really cuts your craving for alcohol. So instead of having 2 glasses of wine or splitting a bottle of wine, you're having one glass or one cocktail. And we're starting to see some restaurants offer smaller portions or kind of lean into that to try to capture some of those diners, because people do still want an experience, I think, right? Even if they're not eating as much, they want that experience of being cared for and not having to cook and do the dishes and all that. So I think, restaurants, we use that word a lot in 2020. We said pivot, right? It's a difficult business. It's always been a challenging business, and right now it's maybe a little bit harder than it was before.
what I was going to say. Are we at COVID type closures?
I don't think so. And just, the pace of openings, right? Like, we talked about, Real closed.
Yeah.
It became a sports bar, right? Somebody snapped that space up immediately. Down the street from it, Vibrant closed. Well, like two of the best operators in the city of Houston, Bobby Hugel and Justin Yu, the owners of Spobble and Better Look Tomorrow in Anvil, snapped that space up, and they're opening a new restaurant there. So, I think there are still people who see opportunity in this business.
I have often had this philosophy, and I think it's pretty obvious, that if you want to succeed as a restaurateur in Houston, you have to give people a lot more food than the plate can hold. And free refills on tea.
Yeah, I call this the Pappas Restaurants effect, right? Big portions.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, it's true. If you go into a restaurant and you feel slighted on the portion, you're not going to go back.
No, I think that's right.
That's just the way we are in Houston. We expect a lot.
I want the chips and salsa. I want the bread with the little olive oil.
Yeah, and don't charge me for it. because
And don't charge me for the bread.
You should be glad I'm here.
Yeah, no, I was talking to somebody just a couple days ago, and they're like, man, the prices at Kenny and Ziggy's. And I go,
Oh, yeah.
but you get 2 meals out of it. Those
Yeah.
sausages are...
Still, those are for a sandwich.
They are very expensive, but they're
Just
still
saying.
around.
And they're still great.
But it's crowded every time I go there.
I know, I can't get a table.
People see value.
Okay, so
Okay.
go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was going to say, looking to the future, what concepts, what restaurants, what folks coming into the area are you most excited about?
Well, like I said, Bobby Hugel and Justin Yu are opening a new restaurant in Montrose. They haven't said anything about the name or the style of food or any of that stuff. But just given their track record, that's very exciting. We're all giddy about Italy coming.
Support comes from Rice University's Master of Interdisciplinary Studies, a flexible degree taught by Rice faculty, balancing life and learning for working adults. Applications due by October 15th. More at gls.rice.edu.
Hey, this is David Green, host of Sports in America. Each week, we will explore stories that shape athletes and fans alike. Join me Sundays at 5 p.m. on News 88.7 for in-depth conversations with people across the world of sports, from the star who hits the game winner to the millions of us whose lives are touched by the game, covering everything from
Caution,
elite
please
competition
mind
to the personal stories behind the games. Sports in America, Sundays at 5 on News 88.7.
Your NPR station, News 88.7 KUHF Houston, a service of the University of Houston. Get local and breaking news anytime at houstonpublicmedia.org. Listen to us on your favorite devices. Tell your smart speaker to play News 88.7.
It's the Splendid Table from 8 p.m. American Public Media. I'm Francis Lamb. For most people, tea comes mostly beaten up and kind of powdered in little bags for your cup. When you start trying to find the real thing, things get pretty deep, pretty quick.
These ancient terroirs that have been around for millennia still existed, and tea was still made in the same way. And it was so exciting to be that person who went and found it, and also how extraordinary I must have seemed to the people in those remote regions. But one of the first times I wanted to take photos, and I thought, I'll look great in a red dress in a green field. And of course, that's a wedding dress color in China. So like, oh my God, so naive.
That's Henrietta Lavelle, founder of the Rare Tea Company. We've also got the brilliant scientist cook, Nick Sharma. It's coming up on the Splendid Table.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Dan Ronan. President Trump is criticizing former CNN anchor and now independent journalist Don Lemon, who was arrested and charged by the Justice Department on a federal civil rights violation concerning his coverage of a protest inside of a Minnesota church. Trump said Lemon's arrest is probably the best thing that's happened to him. On CNN's State of the Union, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche was asked about Lemon's expected defense. He was working as a reporter and not as an activist.
Being part of the planning, being part of the decisions to make sure the police didn't know this was happening and federal law enforcement didn't know this is happening. There are multiple allegations there. And guess what? He gets to have a lawyer and he gets to have a defense. And so if he wants to go forward with the defense that, oh, shucks, I was just a journalist, he can do that.
Washington, D.C. Attorney Abby Lowell, who is representing Lemon, called his arrest an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment. A federal judge in Massachusetts has ruled that a secretive group of climate skeptics convened by the Federal Department of Energy violated federal law. NPR's Jeff Brady reports the group's work was used to bolster a Trump administration effort to stop regulating climate pollution.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright picked a group of 4 scientists and an economist with a history of casting doubt over climate science. They issued a report that in part bolstered the Environmental Protection Agency's proposal to end regulations on greenhouse gases. Wright said the purpose was to spur debate, but for nearly all climate scientists, the debate the secretary wants is settled. Environmental groups sued. Now federal judge William Young has ruled the climate working group violated a federal law which says advisory groups that contribute to policy making must be transparent. The Energy Department could still appeal. Jeff Brady, NPR News.
Starting today, travelers without a real ID will face a new fee at airport security. NPR's Windsor Johnson reports how the federal government is trying to speed up compliance.
New rules at TSA checkpoints are now in effect. Passengers who haven't gotten a real ID will face a $45 fee to get through airport security. It's not a fine, but rather a payment for using a backup identity verification system called Confirm ID. It gives travelers access to an expedited screening pass that can be used over a 10-day travel period. Clint Henderson of the Points Guy says this is the government's way of pushing people toward compliance.
The government wants those who have not gotten a real ID to either get it or to help pay for this extra screening that they have to do at the airports.
The new requirement could catch some people off guard, especially those unaware the rules are changing. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
And from Washington, you're listening to NPR News. A bomb cyclone has dumped about a foot of snow in some parts of North Carolina, making the snowfall one of the biggest in years. The North Carolina State Patrol says there were about 750 traffic collisions Saturday, but none of those were fatal. Freezing temperatures have stretched all along the East Coast and through the Midwest. Overnight temperatures in Orlando were in the mid-20s. Danish veterans led thousands to the U.S. Embassy in Copenhagen Saturday to protest President Trump's disparaging language towards NATO troops. NPR's Frank Langford reports.
Last month, President Trump minimized the contribution of NATO forces fighting in Afghanistan, saying they, quote, stayed a little back, a little off the front lines.
The rhetoric that the president is using is so uncalled for.
Ivar Gulbrandsen, a business consultant who's lived in the U.S., was among the protesters. He noted that Denmark lost more soldiers per capita in the war than any other country.
Can you imagine how the families, how they feel when they lost a son or a daughter?
Trump has complained that many NATO allies didn't spend enough on their own defense, but the 2022 invasion of Ukraine and Trump's threats sparked a big jump in military spending. Frank Langford, NPR News.
Houston Democrat Kristen Menefee easily won a special election Saturday to win a seat in the U.S. Congress. Menefee will assume the seat held by the late Congressman Sylvester Turner, who died nearly 11 months ago. His win gives the Republicans the control in the House with 218 seats. Democrats have 214. Several special elections are planned. I'm Dan Ronan, NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include FJC, a foundation of donor-advised funds working to maximize the impact of charitable giving and to create customized philanthropic solutions. Learn more at fjc.org.
The Splendid Table is supported by Legacy Box, dedicated to helping customers turn boxes with family videos and photos into memories that can be shared with generations to come. More at legacybox.com. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from APM. So, I recently got to travel to Japan with my family, and it was an absolutely fantastic trip. And while it's a little bit of a cliche to talk about, it is just so true that so many people there have a real passion for what they do, be it an ancient craft or making noodles the way that they were taught for generations, or something as simple as helping you find a pair of jeans you're really gonna love. And it made me think about my favorite kind of food people to talk to, the ones that are just head over heels with what they do. Today, we get to talk to two such people. Later in the show, we'll visit with Big Sharma, the former scientist turned cookbook author, now living his best life in America's test kitchen. And first, we talk to the wonderful Henrietta Lovell, founder of the Rare Tea Company. Henrietta started her shop in Britain, but now finds herself supplying teas to the best restaurants in the world, including Noma in Copenhagen and Cezanne in Tokyo. But what sets buying tea from her apart isn't just the delicate flavors, it's the understanding that you're buying from farmers and true craftspeople. And her own craft is in connecting with those folks and understanding their work.
So hey Henrietta, it's so lovely to see you.
Hello, Francis. Lovely to see you.
Keep
and
right.
To you. Thank you
And
so
then
much.
exit
same.
right.
So I'm excited for this because I grew up around tea. Obviously, my family's
Exit
Chinese,
right.
and I've always wanted to learn more about it. So every time I have a chance to talk to someone who really knows about tea, I get really jazzed. Because tea is so amazing,
ready
right?
to
It is
turn
the most consumed beverage on earth after water, right? It has like the second longest history of any beverage. Going back to like 2700
left.
BC or something crazy. And yet, most Americans, and even as you told me, most Brits, like yourself, really don't know that much about it. So let's start with, how did you get so into tea?
It's a long and winding road, but it's been a fascinating one. I started, like most people, drinking kind of pretty generic, big brand, industrial tea bag, and I thought that's what tea was. And I think that for a lot of people, that's what tea is. And then I had the huge privilege and adventure to go and work in China, and that was sort of at the end of the last millennium. I'm quite an old lady.
Turn left.
It was venerable. Yeah, it was in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. I got to
Turn
go
left.
to China, and I got to try amazing tea that really blew my mind. And I know we often use that phrase, but it was really mind-altering and world-altering and shattering, because I just thought, this is something I know, I'm very, very familiar with. My culture is sort of made up of English breakfast tea. And then I got a little cup of oolong. And I didn't really know that oolong existed. And I didn't know that tea could be drunk out of a little tiny cup, and it could be brewed from real whole leaves
let's
that
find
would
a new route.
rehydrate, a herb that rehydrated into a leaf, and that the flavor profile would be so extraordinarily complex. It started sort of all green and luscious and went into tropical notes of mango and pineapple, and then ended with this lovely dry mineral finish. And I was like, what is this? The tea. And it wasn't because it was flavored or because it had some chemicals on it. It was just this beautifully crafted leaf. And I thought, God, I've been missing out on so much. I thought, this is very fascinating. I want to learn more about the history, and I started reading things and finding out that these ancient terroirs that had been around for, as you say, millennia, still existed, and tea was still made in the same way. And at the time, China had been quite closed off for quite a long time. And it just started to open up, and it was possible to go and visit places that were kind of mythological. Imagine if Champagne, for instance, had been something you could read about, but you couldn't go to this region of France. And then suddenly you could, and you found that they were still making this ancient fizzy wine in the same way that they've been making it for hundreds of years. But here you have tea being made in the same way for thousands of years. And it was so exciting to be that person who went and found it, and also how extraordinary I must have seemed to the people who live and work in those remote regions, and suddenly turned up. And one of the first times I wanted to take photos, and I thought, I'll look great in a red dress in a green field. I wanted to tell the story about these places, so I thought, I'll put on a red dress. And of course, that's a wedding dress color in China. So they're like, here's a single woman in a red dress. Oh my God, so naive. And, I've learned a lot. I'm still very naive, and I'm still learning a lot. So forgive me for any mistakes.
Okay, so let's talk about the tea itself for a moment, because I think this is one thing that is such both a source of intrigue for me, but also seems sort of mysterious. So like you said, a beautiful tea, simply steeped in water, can have so many different flavors and can evolve through the course of your drinking that same tea, right? It's not just in that one mouthful. It's like the second cup of that same tea or the third sip of that same tea actually can taste different. I once heard that tea is something like
Keep
like
left,
physically, chemically
and
has
then turn
2,500 flavor compounds.
Yeah.
You know, the natural compounds that create flavor, where wine has a few hundred.
Turn
so
left.
there's an enormous range of flavors that can be had in
It's
tea.
like a
But what's so interesting is
cornucopia.
it's crazy, but it all comes from the same plant.
Yeah.
Like matcha to a black tea is all from the same plant. So tell us, what are some of the factors that make one tea different from another?
Well, it's such a wide story as well. I mean, I want to say when a chef comes into my tasting room and they see the range, they're like, what? And then we start tasting the range of flavor profiles. It's so vast that people feel like they've just learnt a new color or like got a new palette to play with. It goes, even the pH changes. So wine, of course, is always acidic, but the pH of tea can change from neutral into acid and alkaline. So you've got so much going on, but also, you know, from fruity to nutty to chocolate to malt to citrus, there's almost nothing that you can't find. I can give you a tea that tastes like peaches. A specific tea from a specific region in Cholo, on a farm called Satemwa in Malawi. There's a specific varietal on a specific tea made in a specific way that will taste like peaches and apricots.
That's why.
And so the factors that alter that flavor are exactly the same with wine. Everything you know about wine, it comes from one plant, grapes. Tea comes from Camellia sinensis. And then all the factors of terroir and varietal. So, you know, there are many varieties of grapes, there are many varieties of tea within the two main branches. And then when you plant it, how you plant it, the pH of the soil, how the water drains off that field, what the gradient of that field is, how high it is when the sun hits the field in a certain morning, whether there's cloud cover at a certain time of year, what the rainfall is. All those multitude of vagaries of that tiny spot of the world will change the flavor profile. And then, of course, you've got the seasons. When do you pick it? How do you pick it? And then, how do you process it? So are you keeping it completely natural as it is and just drying it, making a white tea? Are you roasting it, toasting it, making it into a green tea, steaming it in Japan? Are you then crushing it a little bit to start oxidization to make an oolong and controlling that oxidization to make maybe a light oolong into a dark oolong? Or are you crushing it, oxidizing it, and then roasting it in a way to produce a black tea? And then you can go even further and ferment it into a pu'er. So, I mean, take all that knowledge that you've amassed about choosing a wine and what flavor profiles you like, and you'll find that in tea. And that brings me to the really important thing. It's like, with a wine, you want to know a bit of a story, don't you? You want to know, not beyond the color, where does it come from? Beyond the country, what region? Beyond the region, what part of that region? Beyond that, what farm, what maker, what craftsman? And when you start hearing the story of amazing craftsmen, you fall more deeply in love, and the flavor appreciation improves. And the same is true of tea.
And I love you said this to me the other day, which is, you know, when people talk about wine, you can tell that they think it's valuable because of they talk about where it's from and how it's made, and they know all this detail about it. And yet we don't do that with tea, but you could. And we can value tea, and we can value the people who make tea. And maybe let's go here, because I want to ask you about the regions that you source your tea from.
Can I tell you about this one?
Sure, what are you drinking?
This is called cloud tea. We call this cloud tea. This comes from Nayan Lilibadan. She's a female tea maker, and she actually owns her own land in Meghalaya, in India, in the Himalayas, And, you know, I can tell you that this is made by someone who really cares about her community, her land, and the flavor of what she produces. She doesn't want to produce lots of tea. She wants to produce really good tea that will change your mind about how tea in India can be. And it's light, it's got a lovely chocolatey, like dark chocolate, burnt sugary sort of aromas, a little bit of maltiness, and a high florality. And by florality, I don't mean like lots of flowers, but like lots of bright aromas coming off the top.
Oh, beautiful. See, I love that.
It's really something you can fall in love with. I mean, and it floods your life with pleasure. It costs a few cents more to go and find those amazing teas per cup, really just a few cents. And then you get all that from it. Well, if you trade it up in wine, to get the really good stuff. It's a lot of dollars.
This bottle is several hundred, that bottle is several thousand, and but here, a few cents, and you can really make a difference.
Henrietta Lavelle is the founder of Rare Tea Company. More with her in a minute, and then our friend Nick Sharma joins us with tips on how to make your home cooking even better. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from APM, American Public Media.
Tonight on Houston Public Media TV8, it's a new season of Miss Scarlet at 7 and All Creatures Great and Small at 8. Then watch Bookish, the new series from Sherlock co-creator Mark Gatiss at 9. Tonight on TV8.
Support comes from the Dan L. Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center, offering comprehensive cancer care that is compassionate, personalized, and driven by clinical research. More at stlukeshealth.org/cancer.
Learn something new.
I want to start with how crowds of people can act like fluids.
Yes.
What?
I mean, this is physics, so I love it.
Make a connection.
I have no idea who they voted for. I don't care. This tailgate in particular, everybody's welcome.
Dig a bit deeper.
We're often looking for a small secular liturgy for our lives, and poetry can provide that sometimes.
Stay curious with All Things Considered from NPR News.
Weekdays beginning at 3 p.m. on News 88.7.
The Splendid Table is supported by Progressive Insurance. On the road and at home, customers can simplify their insurance needs and protect what's important by bundling home and auto with Progressive Insurance. Learn more about Progressive and bundling at progressive.com. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table, the show for curious cooks and eaters. We're talking with Henrietta Lavelle, tea explorer and founder of Rare Tea Company. Let's get back to it with her. You buy and sell teas mainly, I think, from like 3 different regions, right? That have different styles of tea, and like who've been producing tea and like enjoying tea in their own culture in a different way. Yeah. Teas from China, from Japan, and this is a little bit of a unique situation, but South Asia and East Africa, which is I believe the tea industry started there really because British brought tea there to be farmed for consumption, in
the global north.
But tell us about these 3 regions and how they differ from one another in broad brushstrokes for a beginner.
So I started in China where tea began, and it really, as you said, millennia of tradition, and rather like wine, a long cultural appreciation. I mean, emperors were buried with their favorite kind of teas for the afterlife. I mean, and all through history, it's been considered precious, a medicine, something that we would trade up to get the best we could afford, always. Just like wine, we might have a cheap wine on a Wednesday night, and then if your mother-in-law is coming round on Sunday, you might buy something a bit better to impress her. You aspire to what you could afford. And there's this huge differential in price range in teas, and depending on how they're crafted, how rare they are, how special, how difficult they are to make. And China's had that for a really long time, and still to this day, a tea farmer thrives and flourishes like a vineyard, because if he's making really great tea, he can get a great value for it. The only real issue is the craftsmanship. It's difficult to keep. People don't want to live in very rural communities and do agricultural work. That's the main problem that tea has. And otherwise, if you make great tea, you're doing really, really well in China. And I think it was the 5th century, the Chinese shared tea with Japan, and Japan also has this very rich culture of tea appreciation. It's changing slightly now, and people are drinking matcha lattes, which is so strange.
From the country that created matcha as a ceremonial sort of
precious, meditational, and I spent 5 weeks in China in 25, and I saw a lot of iced tea, which is really strange too, because tea is really supposed to be as a kind of medicine, warm and good for your body, and having it cold is really anathema to ancient tradition. But things move and change, and customs and people change. But we know now, wherever we are in the world, if you want to buy Japanese tea or really good Chinese tea, you pay a lot of money for it. That's not because it's better. That's because there's a market for it, and it's well appreciated, and people understand its value. But if we took tea from Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, where the British took it, they stole the tea bush from China, and they started planting it in places that were their colonial lands, which is a dreadful, awful story, but and then into East Africa. There isn't an indigenous high value for tea because it was bought in, and the market is really an external market, and we've lost our value for tea, that appreciation, that understanding. So it's an economically very, very different story.
Interesting.
In fact, there are about 15 million people working in tea in those regions, and most of them are women, and most of them living in poverty.
And this is, I mean, I've definitely noticed on your website, for instance, on Rare Tea Company's website, you're very proud of all the teas that you source from all these different places, but to my mind, when I'm reading the stories of the producers in South Asia and East Africa, like, to me, there feels like a special care there.
I fell in love with tea as a drink, and I thought, I really want everyone to know this beautiful tea that I've fallen in love with. That we think there's only this one industrial thing, and there's all this amazing leaf. So I started Rare Tea back in 2004 for that reason, and then I understood there was a very different economic story to tell, and that there's a lot of exploitation, and I wanted to change that story, and I thought, well, it's possible. Tea has been and is appreciated, and people who work in tea can thrive. More than thrive. And so where it's a exploitative industry that survives on poverty, I thought, God, there's an answer to that. There's a change that can happen. And by selling tea from places like Japan, where there is no economic necessity, I'm not doing anyone a favor by buying matcha. I'm just lucky to have those relationships. But by putting it right beside a tea from Malawi in East Africa or Nepal and saying that, look, taste these. They're the same quality. They taste different, but they're the same quality. They can exist on the menu at Noma or Cezanne in Tokyo. They're appreciated by chefs and restaurateurs around the world who really, I think we respect their palates more than you can just hear me saying it. I think then we can say, look, this really does have value, and it's just really about changing our perception. So putting a Malawi peony beside a Chinese white peony and saying, look, these are just as good as one another. That's very exciting, isn't it? And I think it helps people understand. And I do feel that those impact teas, where people paying more and understanding and falling in love with teas from Malawi, where they have more of an impact on a community, I feel more excited, and that's why I get up in bed in the morning.
No, I love that. Absolutely. I think that's amazing. So help us, right? If we are rookie tea drinkers, or if, all we know of tea is iced tea or whatever, we have like a small, tea has a small place in our life, but we're interested and we want to maybe learn more, maybe see what's out there and see what we like and what we might gravitate towards. How would you suggest a person start?
The very most important thing is, I think, find someone who buys the tea from a tea farmer, from a tea community, from people who make the tea, because then they're going to get the value of the tea, and also they're not just buying a commodity product, they're buying a crafted, beautiful thing from a farmer. And I think that's always going to taste better. I think I went to a MAD symposium in Copenhagen, the food symposium, and I heard Farron Adria say that once. If you want amazing flavor, find amazing farmers. And I've over the last 20-something years, I've found that to be true. So find a direct trade tea company, and then start with the tea that you're familiar with. So, like for instance, I have I sell black iced teas, but I can tell you the name of the farm where it comes from, and it's a beautiful version of a loose leaf iced tea. And I think if you try that, something you're familiar with, and you say, oh, now hold on a second, that tastes a lot better than the industrial one, which has no terroir, no connection with a farmer or place, or even a country, which is probably not helping that farming community and isn't made with love and care. And if that tastes better, then you could start exploring, okay, well, I trust these people. Let me try maybe a black tea that I'm going to have hot. And a good tea company hopefully will tell you the flavor profiles. And be like, oh, no, I really like dark chocolate, or I'm more of a caramel, or I like more fruity, or you go maybe into the greens. And it's interesting because green tea is not something that's very common in the US at the moment. And I've been selling tea in the US for, I think, about 18 years. It's my largest market, and I've seen the changes, and the shift has gone into green tea, but mostly into matcha. And there's such a world of green tea in the middle. It's like white wine, There's so much flavor variation, and people, when they try it, they really like it. But they've had this one industrial experience. They had this cheap bag, like and it wasn't crafted with love. It was just crafted for price and volume, and it was bitter and dry, and it made their mouth pucker like a cat's bottom. You know? And they're like, no, it's not for me. I don't like green tea. And then so I think find a tea company that you feel confidence in, and then try little bits of flavors that you may not think you like, but honestly, there's a really good tea. You don't have to be a sommelier or a fancy chef to get it. If it's really good, it's just really good. I did have experience to explain this. A red top newspaper, like a tabloid newspaper in the UK, once accused me of selling fancy packaging. They said, tea's tea, you're a charlatan. And so I took the journalist from that newspaper very naively. I took them to one of my favorite customers, who's a tattoo artist in a very dodgy part of London. And it wasn't the kind of place where you get a little swallow on your wrist. It was a place where you get like a full face tattoo, or a full arm or leg. I mean, and there were all the characters, all the other tattoo artists. I mean, the guy he's sadly now no longer with us, but he's called Zed Lahed. They call him the Dot Father. He was his studio, a very famous tattoo guy, and he had a full face tattoo, and all his guys did. And then the customers were also quite heavily tattooed, and it looked like a place that a nice young lady might not feel comfortable in. But I knew Zed very well. He loved his tea. He liked jasmine, silvertip, and oolong. And so the journalist came in with a photographer, and they were all talking about how much they love tea. And I did an experiment with a big brand tea bag against a loose leaf English breakfast that I'd blended myself. And we gave it to everybody, including the journalist and the photographer. And every single person liked the good one that I'd made against the other. So it doesn't mean that you have to be, have a fancy palate.
Yeah, sure.
Or maybe it says something about me where I've just said that people who have heavy face tattoos wouldn't have a good palate, which is ridiculous as well.
I just like the range of friends you have. Yeah.
Yeah, tea takes you to so many amazing places, from duchesses, and I made tea for our late Queen Elizabeth many times, and tea cocktails. To Zed Lahed's studio.
Oh my God. Oh, Henrietta, I love your life, and I loved talking with you today. Thank you so much for coming by.
That's it. Have I been whittering on for that long?
No.
I didn't let you have a word in edgeways, Francis. You sure they're on?
No, it's a great day at work when I don't have to do anything.
Oh my God, I have so many things I want to say. I'm so sorry. But thank you so much for giving me a voice to be able to say those things, because I really believe that once people know that there are communities behind the teas that they enjoy, and that they can help those communities thrive, that that increases their enjoyment, but also they know that there's something small they can do, that we can all do, to make the world a little bit better. I think especially now when we feel like the world is a little, well, sometimes I feel like I'm in a parallel universe where I've gone into the upside down or something. Everything seems so strange, and everything's changing so fast, and we can feel very powerless. There are still these things we can do. We can support amazing farmers in East Africa or Nepal, and we can also at the same time flood our lives with pleasure. So it's kind of a very happy story.
I love that. Well, thank you, Henrietta.
It was a pure joy. Thank you so much, Francis.
Henrietta Lavelle is the founder of the Rare Tea Company. You can find her teas at rareteacompany.com. And she left us with a recipe for her cold brew iced tea, which she serves in wine glasses, by the way. That's splendidtable.org. Nick Sharma is always a blast to talk to. The former molecular biologist turned food photographer and James Beard Award-nominated cookbook author has such a great way of getting people excited to cook. His passion is so infectious, whether he's demystifying the scientific process of cooking or sharing the dynamite flavors of his native India, or both. He's recently joined the fabulous nerds in America's Test Kitchen as an editor-in-residence and stars in a new video series for them called Flavor Forward. Hey Nick, it's great to see you.
Hi Francis, it's so good to see you too.
And I have to say, it's been a little while, but congratulations on your new-ish gig. You are an editor-in-residence in America's Test Kitchen. That's such a funny title. It's like, do you live here now? I don't know. But I don't know. You're a scientist. You love this. Maybe you do live in the test kitchen.
Oh gosh, I love being in the test kitchen. It's a dream come true because literally everyone is a science nerd in there.
Yeah. Well, I love that they're science nerds because they're like cooks first, but you're a scientist and then you're a food nerd after that. So I think it does sound like a perfect match. And I love your new video series with them. It's called Flavor Forward. The food looks fantastic, but I really love how you're watching the videos. You pepper all these cooking demonstrations with these like cool tricks and explain the science of why they work. So I want to spend some time talking with you about some of these videos and some of the recipes and really some of the sort of the magic tricks in them. I know science is not magic. The whole point of science is that it's not magic, but I can't help but say it anyway because it feels like magic sometimes. But let's start with your tandoori salmon. First, actually describe this dish for us. Get us a little excited about it.
So this was one of the first dishes I developed at ATK.
Oh, cool.
And it sounds really simple, when developing a recipe. And I think one of the things with most recipes that are the simplest, they're the hardest to actually develop and get the results. Kind of like cacio e pepe. It's an easy thing to put together on paper, but when you're making it, you run into all these issues. So tandoori salmon was one of those dishes where I said, you know what, I want to make a tandoori dish for you guys, but how do I get the flavors right? And then I'm also using fish, which is not something that's traditionally used even in India with salmon. I mean, salmon's not a traditional Indian fish to begin with. So, sure. And then you've got like me bringing fish to the tandoor. So there were all these complications from the fish being tender, so the proteins kind of denature really fast. How you can bind the flavor in without getting the fish dry. And a tandoor, on the other hand, is this really high heat temperature oven where temperatures go up to 900 degrees.
Yeah.
So how do we do all this in the test kitchen? And obviously I'm not going to expect people to go buy a tandoor oven to make this dish, right?
Step one, go buy yourself a tandoor.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of one of those aspirational things, but it's not practical.
Sure.
So developing this recipe actually turned out to be one of the most fun things I've done in a while. And it started with the fish. I wanted to use salmon because it's a popular fish, and also it has fat, so it keeps the fish juicier during cooking. And then how do we get the broiling temperature right? How do we get I'm giving this away too fast, but how do we recreate the tandoor in the house with an oven, because that's what most people will have. And so we figured out broiling is probably the best way to achieve that char. But then with broiling and a protein like fish, because the proteins are so delicate, they squeeze out moisture really fast during cooking, and that makes the fish rubbery. So how do you avoid that? And we came up with this idea of brining the fish, because brining is used a lot in cooking. And I started with salt. I put fish in salt solutions. I put fish in baking soda solutions, because baking soda is another popular brine that's used commercially with a lot of meat manufacturers. And then the other thing I did was, let's just try a double combo of both salt and baking soda and see how that works.
Okay, so the baking soda thing is, I think, probably going to be new for most home cooks, like brining and salt. That makes a lot of sense for us, right? But the baking soda thing is really interesting. So I know adding baking soda to the marinade is sometimes a restaurant trick for beef.
Yeah.
I personally don't really love it. I feel like I can always tell. Sometimes the beef is like, it's tender, but it's like too tender. It's like unnaturally tender. And I also often feel like when I taste it, it makes like the beef is less flavorful for some reason. Maybe I'm making that up, but talk to me about A, what brining and baking soda does, and B, how do you avoid it? Could it be the same problem if you're brining salmon and baking soda? Could it get too tender, and does it disrupt the flavor?
Yeah, those are really good questions. And I think, like, for me, baking soda, I notice it in cookie doughs.
Yeah, I hate
whenever
that flavor.
People put too much baking soda, it feels like this weird metal taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel it's very unpleasant. So one of the things I know people do with baking soda is shrimp. Because shrimp is another seafood protein that is really sensitive. If you cook it too fast or too long, it gets rubbery and chewy, and no one likes that. Even the smells go off. And so knowing that, I said, why don't we just use this for fish and just see how it works? And so we put the baking soda, made a solution of baking soda. I kept salmon fillets directly in it for about 15 minutes at room temperature, left it in there, and then took it out. And it was noticeable. The difference in texture was really noticeable. And so I compared it with salt. And here's what's so interesting. So whenever you have a protein, think of it like a wet towel.
Okay.
When you squeeze that wet towel really tightly, a lot of that liquid comes out.
Yeah.
So that's how proteins are in meat. You've got these structures that when you twist them, and they start to get twisted even more because they're denaturing and changing their physical shape during cooking, all that liquid that's inside is released because it's like a towel that's just dripping all that liquid out. So that's the same thing that we want to avoid with the salmon. And so to do that, the baking soda, what it does, it has sodium in it because it's a salt of sodium carbonic acid. And the sodium adds electric charges to the amino acids on the proteins. And because they're all the same electric charges, like charges repel each other. And so what's happening in this
like a magnet,
situation,
when you like the two ends of a magnet, when they like force each other apart.
Exactly, it's the same thing, And so you've got the same electric charges all over the surface now of the protein after it's been exposed to the brining solution, and they start to repel each other. So they can't come back and contract as much.
Oh, that's
and so that holds the water. It creates these pockets of space that hold water better. So when you're cooking, you don't run through that problem. The second thing coming to and so the the broiling temperature is quite high. I'm trying to build that char that of the tandoor in the fish. This is protecting against it. And then to counteract the flavor problem that you were talking about, I actually ended up rinsing the fish, which I was a little nervous about, but it actually works. So what's happening is, in this particular dish, I'm also using beet juice to replicate the red color that a lot of tandoori dishes have. And beet juice,
food color,
and so when we were doing the test, it turns out that beet juice turns a grayish, a very ugly grayish color with alkaline conditions, and baking soda is an alkali, so it has a higher pH. And so I was losing all this beet juice that I grated and squeezed out, and the color was gone. It was turning gray. Didn't look like, it tasted great, but it just didn't look like a tandoori dish. So not only did I have to rinse the fish to get rid of that surface baking soda that was present, I also had to then go back and add lemon juice to neutralize it, because that just wasn't enough.
Okay, this is where the scientist you works, right? Because the baking soda is a base, right? And bases and acids neutralize each other. So that's so smart that if that's doing a thing to the beet juice, then you add a little lemon juice, a little acid, and basically makes it disappear.
It was an easy fix. It's such an easy fix. Just brush it off, and then you put the marinade back on. You put the marinade and then stick it into the oven, and that's it. And you still have the juiciness because the proteins have changed enough. There's no baking soda now, no high pH on the surface of the fish.
And you've gotten rid of that.
And you got the red
taste.
color, And so it works out really well.
And so the brine is just literally baking soda, salt, and water.
It's just baking soda and water.
Just making no salt even.
So I did test salt, and when I tested salt, it just squeezed all the water out. It just wasn't effective. And then when I did baking soda with salt in water, it did the same thing. So the effect of the salt was quite demonstrable.
So just baking soda and water, a short 15-minute brine, rinse it off afterwards, pat it dry, and maybe even just a little lemon juice to kind of neutralize what's on the surface, get rid of the flavor. So cool. See, I love this. This is like an incredible nerdistry. I love it. And then in your particular recipe for this, you put on this beautiful spice paste, and then you just throw it in the broiler. So a tandoor is a super intense hot oven. Heat comes from the bottom, and usually things cooked in the tandoor are either if it's bread like naan, it's slapped to the side of the wall, right? Or usually you have to use long, basically skewers.
And so, like you said, the tandoor is so hot, it's also heat's coming from the bottom, but it's also being reflected from the sides of the oven. And traditionally, they're made of clay. The more modern ones you see in restaurants will use stainless steel. So there's a lot of heat that's going back and forth, which creates this amplified effect. So things cook fast, they burn. A part of that burning is the flavor that tandoor is known for. Even with naan, you want that burn on the bread, on the back. Yeah, and so I had to recreate that, and so broiling was the easiest way to do it at a much lower temperature. But you just move it slightly closer to the heating element on top. So I think on average I use usually between 6 to 8 inches from the top broiling element, and it works really well.
Nick Sharma is editor-in-residence at America's Test Kitchen and is author of Veg Table. We'll be back with more with him in just a minute. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from American Public Media.
Hi, I'm Craig Cohen, the host of Houston Matters. I know not everyone can catch our show live weekday mornings at 9. No worries. Soon you can hear our encore broadcast weeknights at 9 here on News 88.7 starting Monday, February 2nd.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from the University of Houston Law Center, a global law school known for their faculty, facilities, programs, and international partnerships. More at law.uh.edu.
Hi, I'm John Donvan, host of Open to Debate, where we bring you open-minded discussions and debates about the issues affecting our lives. Everything from science and tech to politics, culture, and foreign policy. In our divided nation, we feel it's more important than ever for people to be open-minded, open to disagreement, and open to listening to the other side. Join me in being open to debate.
Sunday night at 10 p.m. on News 88.7.
The Splendid Table is supported by The Slowdown, where they want you to begin each day with intention. Listen to the Slowdown podcast from American Public Media as your new daily poetry ritual. Subscribe to The Slowdown wherever you get podcasts. I'm Francis Lamb, and you're listening to The Splendid Table. We're talking with Nick Sharma at America's Test Kitchen. Let's get back to it with him.